When I ask you a question at some time, I want you to think as well as you can, but try to draw upon our understanding here. I'll talk a little bit about how we build up the theory. But for example, I did this, I didn't talk about the short answer questions, but at some point I was asking stupid multiple choice and these other questions. And I said, these guys, we talk about demand every single week. We'll talk about demand next week. The whole course is about demand. So I put on the final exam, what is demand? Now it turns out, within the week, I'm going to explain to you the modern understanding of demand. I'm going to explain to you why that is the way to understand demand. That any other concept of demand is completely flabby, right? And, so when I ask you a question, after we discuss what demand is, what is demand? What I thought was, the first time, and almost every time I ever ask this question is, demand is when people want something. Duh. That's high school. We didn't take a course, you're not at university, to spout out something you might have learned at a party, When I ask you a question, you better go, uh-huh. What is he asking? What did I learn? And what can I say? Everybody? Because I'm telling you, I sometimes just feel like shrieking. And after this first exam, when I ask you these short answer questions, and actually sometimes people don't even have to answer the question. I found out in one class, at one point, like 10 or 20% of the class wouldn't even ask you some of the questions. And I'm thinking, we did this in diagrams, we did this in calculations, we did this in real-world application, and I asked you a very simple question. Just tell me what it is you did. And they couldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. Now you think it's incredible, they wouldn't do it. So you've got to be, you've got to articulate. I'm not asking you if you love me, that's hard enough maybe, but when you need to say to somebody, I really like you, what are you going to do? You're going to say, I kind of like you. Could you put a little verb into it? Could you express your feelings? That's all I'm asking, right? So when I ask you something, I want you to say, what can I say about this? And say it, right? That's what the short answer questions are all about. They're never difficult. They're never involving anything I didn't pound at home. And again, sometimes I can say, I might ask that on the short answer. By the way, I never give you the answers to the short answer questions. The answers are in my notes, right? So they're just, basically, what is it? Tell me in your own words. Okay, good. So we're gonna do basically demand and supply, but it's a lot more sophisticated than you thought. We start out explaining demand. Not this lecture. Next lecture we begin. We start explaining demand in a precise, defined way so it's usable. Then we define the supply broadly, just from the surface. We don't explain why these things are what they are. We just say this is what we observe. Then we explain the relationship between demand and supply and equilibrium in market economies. Then we examine shifts in demand and supply. This turns out to be extremely important. By the way, by the second week, you're already able to do quite sophisticated stuff. You can read newspapers and have a good idea where prices might go and this and that. But that's basically, shifts in demand and supply. Then we look at the shape of demand and supply. That's called elasticity. We examine that. That's kind of a pain. It's actually very easy. But students, and I was one of them, didn't get it. They don't get it. Then that's the sort of surface. Then we go into the derivation, the explanation of demand and supply, and break it down in a very sophisticated choice theory called indifference curves and budget lines. Then we break that down into substitution income effects. So that takes somewhat less than half the course. Then we get into costs, which is where the real money is for us, where the real learning is, where the real application to reality is, where the real business techniques are. And so we do that. We examine the basis of cost, production functions. Then we examine here's costs. In the short run, we'll explain, and in the long run. Then we examine competitive equilibrium, profit maximization for the competitive firm, in the short run and in the long run. All that stuff, amazing. If you understand it, amazing. You could go downtown, I can send you downtown, to any investment dealer and talk to them if you understand that and you blow their brains out. Because they can't do that. They're all operating at a very, flabby level. And they will be flat out impressed that you can do that because you're operating in a very, and we all learn this in first year, but we don't. We just learn, we don't tend to try to really understand it. Then we talk about monopoly and monopoly profit maximization, the different types of monopoly. Then we talk about the issue of efficiency, whether monopoly is more efficient, if they define efficiency, than competition, and then we talk about what are called externalities. That's kind of a flaw in the theory. So that's micro. And it is, you'll see, like, I only get annoying and pain for you guys when I keep hammering home the same point. Like, I oftentimes, like, I love to catch my students in a bar watching the Maple Leafs. And I don't blame the Maple Leafs. I grew up elsewhere, and I love Montreal, and the Maple Leafs are always like, my God, what a sucky bunch they were. Now this year they play with a little bit of verve. But like a hockey player will always say, you got to compete, right? If you don't see, like I watch, as a student, if you watch a hockey player tonight and the stick is just dangling like this, they don't go into the boards, they're half-hearted, you have contempt for them. Well, have contempt for yourself when you're not serious. When you go into this exam, it's everything. You're on the game. It's game time, right? You're competing. And if you're competing, you'll be okay. But some of you don't compete. You don't try. That's really pitiful. That is seriously pitiful. So we have to get over that. You have to learn to compete. And that's part of it, right? So basically, I want you to think about this stuff and work hard at it, and you will be amazed what you learn. I promise. Flat. Okay, now, that's the main thing. But we begin with this lecture on production possibility curves. Demand and supply is a discussion of how prices and quantities are determined, how commodities, and we produce certain commodities given a bunch of commodities, how we decide which ones to get. Production possibilities examines what is the limit to the commodities that a society can produce. We can talk about what we could share. We could buy this and we could buy that. Actually, but how much can a society produce? How much can Canada produce? Well, it turns out it's not so obvious. Canada can produce a whole bunch of stuff. In Canada, everybody who wants a car can have a car. We can produce nothing but cars. It doesn't matter who you are, you can have a car. But it might mean, or it would mean, you might not have a house. You might not be able to go to university, but you can have a car. So, we can produce all these things. We can flat out figure out what we can produce, what it takes to produce given the resources. In this room, for example, what could we produce in this room if we wanted to produce something? What would we need to produce it? And how much would we be limited by the number of people in the room? We'd be limited by the resources. We have the raw materials and the machines. So we can produce whatever we wanted, but if a society doesn't want what we produce, why would we do that? But also, if we produce one thing, for example, if we said, we're going to do really well in economics, of course this is a problem for people, particularly during the fall and winter courses. Everybody can get an A in economics, but that means you might get a D in English, right? Because you spend all your time in economics. So we've got to figure out what we can produce of all the things we want to produce, and sometimes we're going to discover. Like I might want you to be working on economics, but I'll tell you flat out, if you do 8 hours of economic studying in a day, we're going to discover a very fundamental rule. The first hour, maybe you fidget a bit for the first hour, but once you're in gear, you start learning pretty quickly. So in the first hour, you learn just like this class. In the first hour, you might learn an awful lot. In the second hour, you don't learn as much. In the third hour, you learn almost nothing, right? It's possible. Because you're tired, you're exhausted, you can't do it. Similar with economics. You don't study, like economics 12 hours a day, insane. Because once you get past 6 hours, you're not learning anything. Your brain is just spinning, right? You won't do it. Like I can say I'm going to work out 12 hours a day. I can't work out 12 hours a day. Because if I'm really working out, after 2 hours, I'm exhausted. I won't even be able to stand up, right? So there's your productivity declines, right? So it turns out, if I want to do, when I want to do economics in English, I could do like 6 hours of economics, then I should switch to English. Because I can actually do something in English, because I can't do anything more in economics. These are fundamental ideas, right? So when we plan the output of the society, we need to think this way. What are we capable of producing? And how much does our capability to produce something diminish the more we produce it? This is important. So that's what a production possibility curve is, and we're going to discuss that. It is simply the maximum output possibilities for given resources, land, labor, and capital, say, in an economy, and the technology. Because obviously, if I say you're going to produce an essay for me, how good an essay you're going to produce in 4 hours, pen and paper, going to the library, taking those books off the shelf? Not much. How about 4 hours with a computer, but no internet? Better, way better, faster. How about 4 hours with the internet? The same 4 hours will produce a much better work. You can get all sorts of data, you can download stuff, you can write faster, right? So the technology is totally relevant. Obviously, you'll write a better essay if you do 8 hours rather than 4, right? That kind of thing. So we see that what we produce is limited by the resources we have. So what we want to do is this. I want to give you some basic, and this will be true for today and a bit of next day. We have to talk a little bit about basic definitions and set ourselves up. But I'm not going to ask you anything about these definitions, really. I ask you to understand things. I will have to define land, labor, and capital. We have to define profit, rent, and wages. And that's sort of basic stuff we're going to do. Then we're going to move into production possibility curve. Okay? So, now notice, we define these things. When you put down, people, for like at least in the Western tradition, since Aristotle, something like 2,500 years, 350 years, people have been clarifying economics. And the economics that we're working on here comes from a guy primarily from a guy named Alfred Marshall in 1890. If I said to you want to really learn something, pick up this textbook from 1890. It's way better than the textbook. Because this guy was smart. And the way he thought was astounding. But, he is very much into explaining, understanding economics in the real world. So he's amazing. But basically, we've had 100 years to work through and see if Marshall screwed up. So even though I'm highly critical of a lot of economics and economists, what we learn in micro, in first year micro, is pretty good. It is really good. It's not perfect, but it's really good. Right? And when we learn in macro, is good. Generally, like some third and fourth year courses, I simply won't teach. Because I think they're dribble. They're just flat out wrong. And they kind of appear, there's a hot idea for 10 years, so what? It's gone. It was wrong, right? But this stuff has really stood the test of time. So, but nonetheless, it's built up logically. When you see it, I present it to you, this is the way it is. There are concepts here, it took 2,000 years to get. People struggle to get that concept, they can never say. The concept of competition, for example, was never articulated in the way we do it now until like 1900. And everybody used the concept of competition. They could never articulate it right? Smith called it many buyers and sellers. That isn't good enough. We need a definition that we can build upon. And I'll explain, right? So, over the centuries, people have really honed it to build up a theory of definitions that you can build upon and that you can work logically from, that you're not sloppy. You're going to see the demand concept. The concept of demand that you have is virtually useless. Analytically, you couldn't analyze anything with it. But the concept of demand we have, we can analyze things, right? I can tell where the price of gas is going to be. All you could be able to tell, well, if your concept of demand is the price of gas might go up. So what? There's an up and a down. You might be right half the time. We want to know how much it goes up, right? To do that, you need a sophisticated theory of demand. So basically, note, we constantly try to understand the basic issues, clarify them. Once we get the groundwork done, we build, okay? Now, it turns out, by the way, if there's flaws in economic theory, and there is, it turns out to be assumptions, but I'm not going to point out to you why this might be a mistake, that might be a mistake. It's not important for now. At the very end of the term, the first term, like late June, we'll talk about one glaring hole and a few other holes, right? Because the assumptions, the sort of assumptions and the definitions were weak. Okay, but other than that, here we go. I'll move fairly quickly here in this first part, because I want to get to the beginning. So, what I do here is Alfred Marshall back. His definition of economics is this. The study of mankind, can you see that? Oh, for a moment, let me just see if I can draw that. Now. Guess you can't imagine how heavy this bridge is. It's supposed to be. All right. So, now, again, when you begin something, like actually Aristotle says, you know, I guess what's called the final cause. The final cause is everything, is the whole.